everyone.
Recording in progress.
My name is Barbara Obst, and I am a nurse, and I am with the SNCC program, which stands for Specialized Healthcare Needs Interagency Collaboration. I am a grant program, which allows me to work with schools and parents, etc., to understand how the medical diagnosis impacts learning. So I was asked today to do a presentation on growing up, which I think for our children, for all children, neurotypical children, children that have special health care needs and have special needs, growing up is really hard to do. And so parents need as many tools in their shed as possible. So this is just a picture of teenagers, and I don't know how many of you have teens, but I know I have one preteen and one teenager, and it is a start of exciting life, but also a lot of questions. And so the objectives really are for this course is to understand the definition of human sexuality, to discuss some of the barriers about talking about human sexuality, and that to understand that the word human sexuality is more than the S word, and to be able to utilize some resources that are readily available via either the library or via Amazon or YouTube to help. So we all know that when we discuss about human sexuality, it's more than the birds and the bees. I think, unfortunately, when we hear any word that has SCX in it, we think of it as just plain sex. But human sexuality is so much more than that. And it really starts at the time of the birth of a child. So people will ask, and they have asked me, well, if it's not about sex, if human sexuality isn't about sex, what is it about? So it is about all these things: identity, safety, how safe they feel in their home, how safe they feel in a relationship, love, intimacy, relationships, whether it be sexual or non-sexual relationships, just building friendships and learning how to communicate with other individuals. Positive adaptive behaviors, increases of self-understanding, increasing their self-esteem, their self-determination, and their self-advocacy. And what we hope is that sometimes to replace those inappropriate behaviors with what we call appropriate and pro-social behaviors. There are some facts that when I've been researching this topic, and I've been speaking on this topic now for over 10 years, and it started when I was working through the SNCC program with the Department of Health on transition planning and got transition. And so the one thing that is really important is, according to R.W. Bloom, who is a researcher, he said that adolescents with physical disabilities are as sexually experienced as their peers without disabilities. And I think this was an awakening for physicians. This was an awakening for us in the nursing field, and also for parents, because I think typically, and even for educators, we don't have a tendency to think that children that have physical disabilities are going to have the same sexual experiences as their peers. And we also know that adolescents with disabilities might express a desire for marriage, children, and having normal adult sex lives. And we know, it's not even think anymore, we know that this is true. So there's a lot of myths that surround human sexuality, and this topic started to get explored back in the early 1990s. And so one of the researchers was Dr. Sugar. And one of the things that they found, that what people were saying when they did interviews and collected some data, is children and youth with disabilities are asexual. And so what that means is that they don't have they're neither a boy nor a girl. They have no feelings. And so consequently, they don't need education about their sexuality. And that we know is not true as of today. The truth is that all children are social and sexual beings from the day they are born. We know that most individuals with disabilities will not marry or have children, so they have no need to learn about sexuality. Again, we know that this is not true. One of the programs that I worked with through the SNCC program was a program for parents that had intellectual disabilities, but it was helping them also raise their children. And that was a real interesting program that we offered. Individuals with developmental disabilities are perceived as forever children without any sexual feelings or any needs. And we know again that this is not true. So, the one thing that we found, there's been a lot of research recently on children on the autism spectrum. And I think number one is because we've learned a lot more about children on the autism spectrum, but we also know that autism spectrum is there's 1 in 6 children that fall onto that spectrum. We also know that autism spectrum, there's also some comorbidities that children on the autism spectrum have. And so there's been an awful lot of research on having classes, health classes, transition planning, helping parents gain information. So we know that they have the right to learn about relationships, marriage, parenthood, and appropriate sexuality. We know that some are unable to obtain information from an environment without instruction. So we know that, some children, depending on where they are on the spectrum, that they do need prompting, that they might need hand over hand, that they might need the information to be presented differently. What we do know is that they have normal sexual feelings. But sometimes what happens is, unfortunately, when they're having these feelings, they express it in society in inappropriate ways. And so that's when there is issues that we see in school settings, in social settings where it is inappropriate. So I do know in the state of Maryland that we have a human, it's for health, that the health program has been written. There have been chapters that have been written for students with learning differences, and that there is a program that is out there. I know Montgomery County was very I would say they helped develop a program. There were health educators down there they have included in their curriculum. So what I would say is, for parents whose children are going to any of your public schools or even your non-public schools, is to find out what are your health classes like, what is being covered, so that you can do reinforcement training to your children. We do know that sexual education does increase proper hygiene skills and health. We do know that sexual health education decreases instances of unwanted pregnancies, STIs, etc. We know that it's not harmful to the student, and that we know that more information leads to increased confidence and ability to make safe and healthy decisions. We also know that research has shown us that there are a lot of barriers. And so some of the barriers that we have is that, like I said, this is a fairly new topic. And so as far as collecting research data, like I said, it started in the 1990s. We know that Some children that have special health care needs, they might have fewer friendships. They might be attending different schools. They might not be attending their home schools. There might be some problems with communication. There might be some problems with literacy or how to interpret the challenges. We know that sometimes in the home setting, and I work a lot with parents and their families, that we know that sometimes it's really hard about giving them a little bit more privacy and a little bit more independence. And we know that some of the children really have sensory sensitivities also that maybe not other children might not experience. So there isn't that much information out there for the parents of how to deal with some of these barriers. We also know from research that they are more likely to report television and making mistakes as their source of knowledge. And this has been done by surveying those on the autism spectrum. There was a research project that was done. And they also reported that they were less likely to report social sources such as their parents, teachers, or peers as a source of knowledge. So we know that some of these children with special needs are either listening to movies or they are viewing movies or they're just making mistakes and they're not getting the information from the right sources. So a lot of times when I'm doing this in person and I see the parents' expressions, I say, you really need to be brave. And I think it's one of those things that as parents, I think that we sort of think that, oh, well, I don't know how to start that conversation. I don't know how I can relate it to my child, etc. So I like sometimes just to think that we really have to be brave and go for it. We're not expecting you to be experts, but we do know that you do know your children. We also know that you know your own family values and you know how your child learns best. Okay? So the parents say, "Well, why talk about sex with him or her when it's most likely it's never going to happen? Is that so cruel?" Well, it's cruel. Well, again, it's not all about sex, okay? We are talking about public versus private. We are talking about personal space. We are talking about hygiene. We are talking about what's happening to your body as you grow. Um, a lot of parents say, I just don't have a lot of information out there to help and support me. And then parents said, well, we want support, but we just don't know where to go for that support. A lot of parents felt that some of the presentations that were all presented to parents was more scary and it was more on the abuse factor all the time. And while that is the reason that we want um, children with special health care needs, no matter what their method of communication is, but to have some method of communication and some method of knowing good touch versus bad touch, is that it really does help because we do know that unfortunately there is a higher rate of abuse. But we know that there's just so much more on understanding the whole full spectrum of sexual and reproductive health. The other thing that is really important is that they do not generally believe that their child can have an appropriate sexual behavior or future where they can appropriately be sexually active. Now, this, granted, it's from 2012, but I can tell you I have given this talk before, and in person, I have asked how many of you think this, and it is exactly the same, that nothing really has changed. The parents also feel that it's a challenge in discussing sexuality, that they feel that, maybe a neurotypical child would initiate the conversation. I can tell you from having my own children as well as now my grandchildren, I don't find many of them initiating the conversation. Um, they are concerned about comprehension. What will my child understand? Sometimes they feel it's overgeneralized, like you're sort of just skirting over the issue. And then they're concerned about, well, if I teach them something, will it turn into a repetitive behavior? So again, I can understand these concerns from parents, but this shouldn't be the barriers from parents. They feel isolated. A lot of parents feel that they don't have a support group that they can go to for that other teens or other pre-adolescents are like their child. So they feel very isolated. They feel that even their professionals that they're working with or their pediatricians don't know how to give them information, or that the only time a professional will address the issue is when it becomes a behavioral issue. And what we found one of the biggest barriers have been is the lack of information regarding what is normal behavior. And parents are also concerned about some of the non-sexual behaviors, like especially if you have some children that are very touchy to themselves, like we say, can't keep their hands to themselves, or that they're touching themselves all the time, that is it being interpreted as a sexual, where it might actually be a sensory concern when they are in a social setting. We know that sometimes sexual expressions are mistaken as deviant behavior. So, that public versus private space, a person's own private space. And then normative sexual behaviors are stigmatized and feared. And this has a lot to do with masturbation and puberty. So again, this is all what parents have said that they've been concerned about. So what do you think the professionals think? And so this has been a hot topic at Kennedy Krieger Institute, and a lot of the hospitals that deal with children is really coming up about how are we going to discuss this human sexuality with our clients. And professionals think, well, the parents are going to have the conversations, or maybe the school will have the conversation, or I'll just address it when it becomes a problem. And boy, I really don't have a full lot of training in human sexuality. And I know that this is really hard to believe, but right now we at Kennedy have just started doing training, I would say, over the last 3 years of really addressing this human sexuality and to help give the tools for professionals, because the professionals do not get this information as part as their general training. And I know that is really difficult for people to think. I did mention about vulnerability, and this is just one thing that these are some of the barriers of why vulnerability can be a problem. And it's because of communication or social deficits, the overprotection, and what we do know, the lack of sexual education. We mentioned before that people know what is healthy and good, and that we want sexual education to serve as a preventative function. So these are just some of the ideas as vulnerability. And we know that it does help prevent instances of maladaptive, inappropriate, and dangerous behaviors. This is just statistics, and I'm just putting it out there. This is for children with people with autism spectrum disorder may have difficulty understanding safe and unsafe behaviors. They might have difficulty understanding, like reading those, what we call social cues, understanding others' negative intentions, and asserting their own wishes and their attentions. We do know that at least 78% of the adults with autism spectrum reported that they at least had one occurrence of a victimization. and that research has shown that sometimes they are 2 to 3 times more likely to be abused. But again, I'm saying this because of either that they haven't read the social cues or they haven't received the training. We are hoping to see these numbers really go down with the addition of more training and more education for students and parents. What we do know is that a lot of times as educators, as parents, and whatever, that language that is used um, should be framed not in deviancy or fear. It should be framed from a problem based. Okay. And I think we all learned this early on. Like if your child does have difficulty keeping hands to self, or that the child has difficulty staying in their seat or respecting personal space. That's how it should be framed. Words such as obsession and stalking should not be used, okay? Again, it should be more from a problem based. And a lot of times we know that behaviors are a result of lack of experience, social deficits, and immaturity. So again, and we see this with um, a lot of preteens and teens, is that they haven't had that experience yet. And so having that learning experience is important. I'm sorry, my screen just froze. Okay, so this is just a little cartoon and it says, what should children know and when should they know it? And then it's the Peanuts with Snoopy. Today in room 301, the birds and the bees, and much, much more. So, one of the things that I felt was really, really important was, what do you teach early on? And so this is one thing that, and I don't know the age of all of the children that you're on this phone call for, but it's really important for preschool and elementary school. So again, I want you to think of cognitive ages of your children, okay? That if they are either in preschool, elementary school, or if they do have an intellectual disability and it puts them in that age category of preschool to 5th grade, there are things that can be taught very early on. Body parts. And the thing that's really important about teaching body parts is teaching them the proper words. I don't know how many times in my profession of working with parents and children that when I am going in to teach a skill, sometimes in a school setting, to do some personal care, is that I have heard words that I do not know what it means. So the biggest gift that you can give any child is to teach them the proper name of their body parts. The biggest thing too, public versus private. So even in your house, we know that there is public area and there are private areas in your home. We also know appropriate and inappropriate touching, okay? Asking permission. May I give you a hug? Or just extending their hand to shake hands. You can only, as parents, teach the values. We can teach what we call generalized values, like but we cannot teach your own family values. So again, that can start at a very young age, about your family values, how you address people, how you listen, what is your family's beliefs? And then it's really important nowadays to start to talk about the changes of what's going to occur in their body. There was actually a study that was done. First of all, we know puberty is starting earlier. Okay, so there is also a study that children on the autism spectrum, that for them to really understand what is going on, it might take about 5 years for them to really understand what's going on with their body. So we're talking about, that maybe hair will start to grow in areas that they never had hair before, that girls might need to start to wear a bra. That is all important, or a sports bra. They might start to develop acne. And we know this was one of the biggest concerns with some of the children, was about them developing acne. And they were very concerned of what was happening to their face because it didn't feel right. And again, this is something that they also don't realize, that they are growing. Sometimes they can't see themselves, or they can't realize how much taller they have gotten. So that is important for them to understand, that this is changing. Voice changing. We know that with boys and also girls, that their voices change, and they become more mature. So that is also something for them to be familiar with. For preteens and teens and young adults, besides that, hopefully you have that foundation of what was taught for the elementary, the preschool, and the elementary age, is that we need anatomy. We need the changes to your body. Again, you're reinforcing that. Gender identity, sexual acts, relationships, safety and laws regarding sexuality. And again, you're going to put in your values. And I think it really is important, because all of a sudden, when your child turns 18, they are now legally thought of as an adult. So it is really important that you are constantly teaching, and it's a lot of work. No matter, like I said, raising children is really, really hard now, and it's really difficult. And there's just so many other things, because the internet is always there. We have 24-hour news. We have internet. They can look up anything, and sometimes there's a lot of misinformation on the internet. We also need to talk about changes in self-care. Maybe before, your child only needed to take a bath once or twice a week, or a shower once or twice a week. Well, now they're an adolescent and they're not smelling too good, and we know that Axe only goes so far, that there's going to be a change in routine. That they want to be independent in doing their own personal care. We're dealing with girls with menstruation, appearance and personal hygiene, clean versus dirty, toothbrush, brushing your teeth. They might have braces. Now you have to teach them about brace care, hair care, showering, washing hands, especially now all during COVID, we had that whole layer again on about washing hands, wearing a mask, etc. Then we go into the fashion, the personal style. Again, we're reinforcing public versus private. What you can do in a bathroom. I had one father tell me, he said that he had to teach his son bathroom etiquette in a bathroom, because there wasn't private bathrooms when they went to a stadium. And that was one thing to explain. This is how, when you stand at the urinal, this is what you do. And I never really thought about that. And he said, was just teaching that. Sensory sensitivities. We might find now that your child develops a whole new group of sensory sensitivities, as well as relationships, self-advocacy, and self-awareness. Then we have all this other dating, attractions, flirting, the rules, sexting, what to do online. We know there's online dating, phone and email skills, relationship skills, I know I worked with a group of um, 19 and 20-year-olds, and the one guy um, said, "Do you want to see a picture of my girlfriend?" And she had taken a picture of herself from the chest up with no bra on, and he was showing that to all work his work friend. He showed it to me. There was no, he didn't realize that that was not proper. There's the whole thing about consent, stages of intimacy, what sexual intercourse could be, contraception, and what the words mean about stalking. If someone says you're a stalker, like if, sexual intimidation and harassment. I think the one question that I always get is about masturbation, okay? And it should only be considered a problem if it is done in public, if it is done excessively, causing pain or interfering with other daily activities, or if it is causing other behavioral issues. We also know that it shouldn't be done if the child is finding it upsetting. The biggest thing, again, is going back and teaching that privacy versus public. Have a term that the child is able to use to understand that maybe he needs that private time or private touching. You might need to give the steps of whether it be a visual steps or a recording of what the steps are of how to masturbate and also how to clean up afterwards. But again, it's going into more detail and explaining it at a level that they can understand. We know that safety skills are important, and we know that there are plenty of programs out there. The schools use a lot of programs. There is Good Touch, Bad Touch. There is Stranger Danger. There's Rings of Safety. We also know that we want to really consider, talking about being really about safe dating. And safety when answering the door or phone. So there is a lot of safety, but this is what you be teaching your other children too that don't have special health care needs. We also have to really watch about child pornography, because we know that if they're having difficulties building a friendship and all of a sudden someone is being nice to them, that some children, because of their poor self-esteem, will do things that really they shouldn't be doing. I can only say, and I know the schools address a lot about internet safety, but as parents, we need to be very well versed in internet safety and looking at what your child is pulling up on YouTube, what they are searching, what are their texting skills, etc., just to be aware. And I think it's also important to know what music is your child listening to. I think this is one thing, especially with different cultures, that certain words are terms of endearment, but in other cultures, it's not a term of endearment, depending on who says it. So again, you have to be aware of what they are. Is it appropriate what they're listening to? What is the language that they're listening? What is the music like, so that you can understand it better? I think the biggest thing that parents can take away is teaching strategies. How does your child learn? And so again, it might mean that you need to use visual charts. It might mean that you have to have very concrete rules or task analysis. It might help to do what we call video monitoring or video self-modeling, like catching your child in the act of what you're expecting them to do. You might need to use that reinforcement all the time of prepping your child ahead of time. Social stories, social scripts. You might role play before going into a situation. So again, These are all strategies that some of you, if you have IEPs, that you might see it on the IEP, but this is something then that you would be applying in your home setting to help for reinforcing. And these were just a couple of examples of visuals of trying to explain to your child about the stages of intimate relationships. And this is an example of a task analysis for a girl to understand how to change their pad. And they might need all those steps because they can't remember the steps. But this way, if they have the steps, that they can do it. And so I had one mother that when she made up for her daughter that had the pads in it, she also made up how to change my pad, that she had it right there as a quick reference, because we don't see this on bathroom stalls. And then social stories, asking for privacy. This is again an area that they might need, like a little door, something to let you know as a parent, hey, I need my private time. Why might inappropriate behaviors occur? These are questions that have been asked to physicians as well as to me. And what we have learned is that sometimes it's difficulty with understanding the social rules. So if they weren't prepared ahead of time, what's going to be taking place? That's when inappropriate behaviors occur. So I want you to think about, if your child has difficulty when there's a change in schedule at school and behaviors come out because it's not following the same routine every day, or even at home, all of a sudden you change up the routine and you notice that your child's behaviors change, that is when it is something that they were having trouble understanding the social rules. So it means they need a little bit more prep time. They might have difficulty communicating what's really bothering them. We see this a lot with girls that are having, right before their period or during their period, that they are having cramps, but they don't know how to explain it. And so the next thing you know, they start doing behaviors that they are not supposed to be doing, or they're acting out. So again, it's being aware of that. Some has learned behaviors that they, all of a sudden, if they want to get out of something, that they've learned how to do it. And again, some of it might be a sensory issue, that we know that some girls don't like, they might not like the feel of the bra that they're wearing or the sports bra that they're wearing. You might have to try a couple different ones. Same with underwear. Some of you might have gone through this with your children, of getting them to find underwear or socks that makes it, that they feel comfortable in. Again, we know that sexual behaviors might occur because of medication. We do know that some medications can either increase or decrease sexuality. We also know that if a child has a head injury, that sometimes if they've had a traumatic brain injury, that this also could affect their sexual behaviors. Sensory issues, pain and discomfort, boredom, inability to masturbate effectively, and not having that private time or that opportunity to express appropriately even what they are feeling. I think it's really important when we're talking about human sexuality is understanding what makes a healthy relationship. And again, this is just like when you're teaching friendship. It's mutual respect for each other. It's that you can trust that person, being honest, having that support, being fair, having those identities, and having a method of communication. what we have picked up in children that have been exposed to unhealthy relationships is all of a sudden you might see verbal insults that your child never said before. You might see an increase in mean words, or you might see some physical signs. Again, it's all important to understand that warning signs of verbal or physical or emotional abuse are a sign of an unhealthy relationship. The goal really of this program is to really help you and your child to have a healthy understanding of human relationships and to develop and maintain a self-advocacy goal. And I think that's really important so that that children can advocate for themselves of what their wants and needs are if they are all able to. As adults, as the parents or the guardians or the grandparents, it's really important whether your child has a disability or not. The teen years are ones that all parents wish that they could get through with no problems. And it's really important, especially today, not to keep your head in the sand. Um, I wanted to address like who can help you with sensory issues that might be related either to clothing or whatever. We do know that occupational therapists, and it's usually not the ones in the school setting, can help you with the grooming issues or anything that is related to sensory. They can work on a sensory diet and to help you get your child to be desensitized. And that is one thing that you can ask for a referral to a pediatric occupational therapist, that if they are having sensory issues, that they can help you with this, because there's a lot of tricks in the trade out there that really help um, children with sensory issues. I had one parent that said she couldn't understand how her son coming out of the shower. He was independent. He was like 13 years old and he was taking his shower independently, that he always would come out of the shower with soap on his head. He at least got the soap in his head, but he always came out with the same amount of shampoo on his head. Well, it turned out he needed that visual reminder of looking at himself to see where all the soap was. He couldn't really feel it. And again, he also didn't like how the water felt beating down on his head. But it took many tries. So she finally got a shower mirror to put in. And then she also found that she switched out the shower head to a handheld shower head that he could control. And that made all the difference in the world. So again, it's, either trial or really getting help from professionals that can help you with the sensory issues. I think that there is a wonderful book that you can download from the Autism Society, and it's a parent's guide that actually helps you. It scripts it for you of what to discuss with your children regarding human sexuality. And I think that's a really good resource out there. There are books that are called All About Tom, and there's a series all about Ellie. They are wonderful books. There's some that are like written in cartoons. There are books in your library that just for learning body parts that you can find in the toddler section. I know that Pathfinders also has resources, as well as your physician should have some resources. And these are just some of the resources that I put. So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And I'm going to, if there's any questions or concerns that you have, I think to let me know. Now's the time to ask.